I was walking to school one morning from the boyfriend's apartment, and I stopped on this bridge. All the traffic's rolling around you. And I literally said out loud to myself, I have to change my life. And so how do you do that as a 14-year-old?
Welcome to Rising to Resilience, the podcast where we explore real stories of authentic struggle, strength, and ultimately hope and transformation. I'm Sharon Hugick, and I am convinced that resilience isn't just about bouncing back and white-knuckling it. It's about who we become in the process of going through really hard things. Each week, we'll be exploring conversations with people who have faced devastatingly hard heartbreak, loss, unexpected challenges. Yet, even through that pain, they've discovered new strength, they've found purpose, and somehow even joy on the other side. If you are in the middle of a storm right now, or if you're just looking for hope and encouragement for the journey, this is a really good place. Here, my hope is that you'll find perspective and resources and practical tools, but also give you something to cling to, because hope is what it's all about. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. It is a delight to have a conversation today with my friend Mal Wrenn Corbin. Mal and I actually went to college together. It's fun to share an overlapping history and memories of places. So thanks for joining me today, Mal. It's awesome to have you here.
Thank you, Sharon. It's so great to be here. So glad that we have crossed paths all these years later, and go Big Green.
Yeah,
Yes.
Go Dartmouth. Woo-hoo. I loved it. You loved it.
Loved it.
Iconic college experience.
For sure. For sure.
Mal, you're based in Boston or the Boston area, and you've had a wonderful career. You have a beautiful family, and you have a really compelling story. Would you just, before we dive into that, can you share a little bit about where you are today and what life looks like for you now?
I had a really tough early life, and I know we'll be getting into that. But I feel incredibly fortunate to say that today I have a beautiful life. I've been able to build a really successful career in the financial services space. I'm now a published author, which feels a little funny to say, but true. And I'd say probably most importantly, I live in a loving home. I've got a wonderful husband and Greg, an amazing son, Jack, and even a couple crazy dogs and a couple of crazy cats. Yeah, so we've got it all. Not an easy road getting here, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your perspective is when you can see how beautiful healthy is, right? I mean, you know the difference.
That's for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. You wrote a biography about your story. The title is Raising Wrenns, which is a neat play on words. What drew you into writing your story? Was there a moment where you felt like it was the right time to share what you've been through?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like everything else, it's a little bit layered. I've had a lot of trauma in my early life, and out of that, frankly, comes a lot of crazy stories. And a lot of times, people throughout the years will say, "Oh, you should write a book," and you always kind of fluff that off. Yeah, I know. And when I met my husband a good 12 years ago now, he was like, you really should think about writing a book. But honestly, Sharon, I think at that time, I felt that all of that craziness was in the rearview mirror, and I was well adjusted. I had figured life out, if you will. But a funny thing happened as I started to go down that journey of writing this book and having to really dig into the depths of those memories and those experiences. Out of that came the real beauty in it all, and truly coming to some peace and as much understanding as I could with that past. While I had thought I had escaped it all, I truly came to this understanding that, hey, it is always going to be right there in the rearview mirror. And it was a beautiful way for me to harness that history, and instead of running from it, and by the way, um, that veil of shame that sometimes I think comes along with trauma for a lot of people, which wasn't mine to bear, to say, actually, this is my story, this is my history, and actually I'm quite proud of the more beautiful human that I am for having weathered it.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. I mean, engaging in those stories from your childhood, going back and as an adult, revisiting things, were you able to see things differently then? Like bringing an adult's mind into a child's experience?
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned in all of this is that family is so complex and it's messy. And I've found that those relationships are very fluid. So, through the years of trauma, I'd have periods of time where I was really angry with my father for maybe not being there. And by the time I came around to writing the book, you might find that I might seem even a little more sympathetic to my father. And in those years, I was more angry with my mother. And ultimately, all these years later, both of them have since passed. And it's just interesting to me that in death, they're both gone, but my relationship with them continues on, and it
Oh,
continues to
wow.
be fluid just based on, the more I can understand and the more I can process around that history. And also just having some grace for the human beings that they were, and as imperfect as they were. I
Yeah.
know they weren't monsters. They were complex beings. And yeah, so I guess that's what I would
Yeah,
say.
right. So you grew up in Worcester, Maine South neighborhood. Am I getting that right? Is that how you
You
say it?
have people would know it as Worcester, Mass, in Massachusetts, but anybody who's familiar with Worcester is likely familiar with the Maine South neighborhood, which is it's a particularly tough neighborhood in Worcester. And, to back up a second, Worcester's like a lot of maybe smaller or medium-sized cities across the United States that are old factory towns or old mill towns. And sometimes, they've had this heyday, and the fallout of that sometimes is you can end up with a lot of unemployment and neighborhoods with a lot of poverty. And that was a pretty good description, I'd say, of the Maine South neighborhood when I was growing up there in the
Yeah.
80s.
So what was life like for you then as a child?
Yeah. So we did live in pretty significant poverty. It was not unusual to be standing in line at the local soup kitchen. We had in our family a lot of domestic violence. My parents both struggled with their own forms of substance use disorders. There were occasional placements in foster care. There was a lot of neglect. And then that also kind of paved the way for putting their children, I was one of three, putting their children in the path of danger. And so that was some of the challenges that my family faced. But in terms of this Maine South neighborhood in
Yeah.
Worcester, that was also representative of the area we lived in too. So it almost created this culture, this underground culture too, that held its own form of dysfunction,
Hmm.
if you will.
So what I hear you saying is like your story and your family's dynamic wasn't unusual in the community that you were raised in. It felt
I think
normal.
that's right. I think that's right. So, I think sometimes if you've got a family that's got a lot of challenges going on, an outsider looking in might say, geez, I think that kid's in trouble. And you didn't have a lot of that because, in my
Huh.
case, because it was just part of the fabric of that area at that time. Yeah.
You've spoken about moving many
Mm.
times, about loss, lots of instability, and obviously trauma. Can you tell me about a time when that story or that reality felt like it was going to break you?
Yes, sure. There's a time in particular. I would say probably between the ages of 13 and 15, because our family slowly but surely started to fall apart. So early on, it was mom and dad. I was the oldest child, and I had a brother and sister, twins, that were a year younger. So I was the
Wow.
oldest. Yes. And slowly but surely, that family unit, as dysfunctional as we were, at least we had each other. And my sister was then adopted out of the family at the age of 5. My parents did divorce at about the age of 12, 11, 12. And shortly thereafter, my brother moved off into foster care permanently. And then ultimately, I ended up on my own. And at the age of 14, I'm now living with a quote unquote boyfriend who's 19. And in his apartment, I'm living with him along with 3 other grown men.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And so it's really not a good situation for a 14-year-old girl who's really still a child.
Yeah.
And it's an odd dynamic because as a teenager, you desperately want to be independent. You think you have all the answers as a teenager. In my mind, this is my relationship, and you'll almost do anything to protect that. But also, I had come to the realization I knew this was a dangerous situation to be in, and I was feeling trapped. And it was an important turning point because previously, we did figure messy stuff out as a family unit,
Hmm.
but now I was on my own. And so even as a child, I had this incredible realization that it was on me to figure this out. And I had to make a change. I had to change my life.
Wow.
And I was walking to school one morning from the boyfriend's apartment, and I stopped on this bridge, which is just wild to me that this took place on a bridge, a bit of a crossroads, if you will.
Hmm.
And I stopped in that middle of the bridge, all the traffic's rolling around you. And I literally said out loud to myself, I have to change my life. And so how do you do that as a 14-year-old? And I went on to school that day, and when I got there, I just stopped at the main office window where the office ladies are working away,
Mm-hmm.
and I knocked on that glass, that glass window that separates the hallway from the main office. And those office ladies eventually looked up, and I said, "I think I need a foster home." I had to ask for help, and that was the start of it. It wasn't clean from there. A lot of messy steps ahead, but it was critical because it was proof that I could take some control of my circumstances even as a 14-year-old and
Mm.
change the trajectory of things, even if
Right.
from there it wasn't immediately clean and neat.
Do you know what was happening prior to that moment on that bridge? Can you remember? I know your mom had issues with addiction. Your
Yeah.
father was gone. Your
Yeah.
brother or sister, they were removed. Was it just you and your mom then at that point?
It was actually just me.
Okay.
So just prior to that, my mom, she was struggling with cocaine and crack at that point. And we had a history of constantly being evicted from whichever apartment we were in. By the age of 15, I had already lived in 15 different apartments. And so it was time to move again. And her thinking on the next step was we were going to move in with this other woman, a friend of hers who lived in a notoriously dangerous area of town that was known for prostitution and a host of other challenges. And I already knew that, and I wanted no part of going. And I also knew this woman had an infant of her own, and I just knew that that was going to become my responsibility. And I had just said, you know what, I want to stay with this boyfriend. And my mother just she was like, okay, if that's what you want to do. So I was on my own, and I wasn't connected with my mother or anybody else in my family at
Mm-hmm.
that point.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, let me ask the question, what did you recognize about living in that circumstance that felt like I can't
yeah.
do it?
Yeah. I knew that I still needed to be going to school. And school was always a safe haven for me, right? It was consistency, it was stability, it was people for me that always seemed to be acting, generally speaking, in your best interests. It was food. It was
Mm-hmm.
breakfast, it was lunch, and I did enjoy learning. It was a bit of
Mm-hmm.
an escape from the reality of the day-to-day home life. So that I stayed consistent with that, thankfully.
Yeah.
But I also was working a part-time job at a little pizza place, but making minimal income. But these guys I was living with, there was dysfunction in that I saw this as a relationship with this man, and it wasn't a relationship. It was inappropriate at best. And there were also expectations being placed on me around what my role was in that apartment in terms of contributing financially, cleaning and cooking. And because I wasn't paying rent, but these men they were developing anger toward me that I was almost freeloading, if you will. And I was just feeling like I can't do this. I can't survive here.
There's something really extraordinary about that. I mean, you can see it yourself. You were a child in overwhelmingly complicated circumstances. And to execute that kind of agency or clarity in that moment to say, like, I do not want where this path is taking me. I guess my question is like, there must have been something about your identity that knew that is not me or that's not who I'm meant to be. Can you talk about that? Like, do you know where that courage came from?
Boy, that's a great question. There are a couple of things that come to mind. I have a distinct memory while living at that apartment. I think it's so interesting that one day I was outside of the apartment in this little driveway area. There was a tree that stood alongside this triple-decker apartment building, and I was climbing it because I was still a kid. And I had on a sweatshirt that read Harvard Law. And one of the guys that lived in the apartment had come outside to quote unquote smoke a butt. And he was kind of picking on me. And he's like, you're not going to college, right? And that just lit a fire in me. This notion of somebody telling me, "Oh, no, you're not going to have that," is really interesting to me because I think also for a lot of people that experience trauma, that trauma can really chip away at your sense of self-worth, and you don't necessarily feel that you're worthy of all of the
Yeah.
things. But I'm so grateful for that moment because there's something in somebody telling you no that made me want to fight back. And there was also, as much as I loved my family, I knew pretty early on that I did not want to go down the same path that they had gone down. My father really struggled with alcoholism, like stumble home at 3 in the morning, drunk with one shoe on, one black eye on a routine basis level of dysfunction there. And as I mentioned, my mother really struggled with drugs. And I knew I wanted something different for myself.
Mm,
And so I think that was a big piece of
yeah.
that moment too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you knocked on that window. Were you in that place aware of like the consequences of making that ask?
I definitely, in that moment, as you're about to rap on that glass, all those questions, huge questions for a 14-year-old or for anybody really that are floating around in the air around you, like, should I say something?
Hmm.
If I say something, is my boyfriend going to get in trouble? Is my mom going to get in trouble? Am I going to get in trouble? And yeah, w- where am I going to sleep? Where will I be going next? Where will I eat? But I felt like I had no choice. I had to make a change. Um, and let's be clear, nobody wishes for a foster home, but I did have foster home placement before the day was up.
Wow.
And the flip side of that was I knew I was never gonna have to go back to that apartment ever again, the boyfriend apartment. But yes, it was a situation that I would describe as a mulligan, meaning I needed a do-over, and there are lots of moments in my life where I've needed do-overs, and so what I mean by that is that foster home was not a great situation either, and in fact, I spent one night and decided that night that I would be on the move the next day. So I was
Wow.
a runaway the very next day, um, and that started a period of time where I was legitimately homeless. Um, I had a teacher take me in for the night to brave enough to take me into her home because she knew I had no place to go. I had a a good friend who snuck me into her bedroom closet for a night, and she created a little nest of blankets and pillows for me. And I'm not talking walk-in closet, I'm talking
Mm.
your little standard closet, and she'd sneak me food from the kitchen on the sly, because despite what I look like now, parents didn't want to see me hanging around with their children at that time. My family certainly had a reputation. I had a very kind of dark goth look about me at that time. And so it was literally just sneaking me in the house and sneaking me out for a night. And I did that. It was crashing on friends' couches for a stretch of time until an aunt took me in at 15. And that was a period of time where I reunited with my sister after many years, which was exciting.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
must have felt like finally that there could be some hope for stability. Is that what that represented for you?
Absolutely. It was normalcy, it was stability, it was, I mean, talk about just emotion sitting on the top of your heart, reuniting with your sister after not spending any large chunk of time with her since you were 6 and 5 years old. That was a special time. Yeah.
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 You had the opportunity to break out of that cycle of Worcester, of that neighborhood. And I know for you, you've talked about school and the importance of education. I think particularly gaining entrance into Dartmouth and then graduating, going on to graduate school. What did that educational path do in terms of your transformation? What character does that play in your story?
I just can't even express the importance of that for a kid like me because it is life-changing. You had said something earlier about when we were talking before we got started here on our conversation here today about Dartmouth and it almost feeling idyllic. And that's exactly how I would describe it. You walk onto this campus and you've got manicured lawns and historic buildings, but more importantly, there's this calm in the air. And it was so incredibly different from the world I had known previously. And it was a place where you felt like you could focus on learning.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that. Just focus on learning. You could feel valued. You had access to opportunities, access to an entirely different future. It was a whole new world that I didn't even know existed in my prior life. And to be surrounded by people who just they were so special. They just had so much interest in intellectual conversations and academics. Like, I can't quite describe, like, we just didn't live that life growing up.
Dartmouth for me, and coming from the exact opposite place of beautiful, normal, healthy childhood, I also experienced that. Like, what is this? I remember calling my parents and being like, every single person here is so interesting. And I was sort of floored. What was that like to be in that circumstance when I would have to imagine, like, you're hiding something really vulnerable and private? Was it hard?
I mean, do you have a degree in psychology? Because you just hit the nail right on the head, Sharon. Absolutely was. I was so I was so thrilled to be there. I felt so fortunate and also incredibly proud. My gosh, was it intimidating. It was overwhelmingly intimidating. There was, to your point, I was surrounded by incredible wealth.
Yeah.
And
Insane.
everywhere you looked, I saw a sob. I had never seen anything like that. But yes, so I really struggled with a sense of belonging. And again, that sense of self worth was really lacking. And I was truly just waiting for somebody to figure out that clearly Dartmouth had made a big mistake and come up behind you and tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Mal, you got to pack it up and head back to
Mm,
Worcester. You clearly don't belong here." And, it's taken me a long time to recognize that, as you get to know the other kids there, they're carrying their own things. I know I carry with me a lot of big T trauma,
hmm
and that should not underscore that there are so many of us, if not all of us, that carry our own stories, our own insecurities, our own quote unquote traumas, big, small, or whatever they are, that chip away at that sense of confidence and that sense of self-worth, and it really limits us from understanding and imagining what could be for ourselves and what we're worthy of, because we're all worthy of that beautiful life. And I think that that's the beauty in life, is coming to understand that those kids that seem to be picture perfect, they had their own stuff. Their burdens might have looked different than what I was
Mm,
carrying, but they were significant nonetheless.
yeah. Yeah. I will say, though, that I think I admire your story a little in a different way than somebody like who I was, where I was, my hardship was, the cute boy down the hall wasn't interested in dating me. You were bringing a lot more reality into that circumstance. And I'm guessing those voices in your head, they'd call and say, Mal, you aren't supposed to be here. That's a really loud voice talking. What was it that helped you navigate through those?
Hmm. Life is funny in that as the years go by and you develop experience, because that feeling wasn't unique to Dartmouth, right? All of a sudden now you've got the degree. And then you go on to graduate school and you get another degree, and you keep arming yourself with the proof that now you're worth whatever it is that's next. I forget who it was I had heard interviewed on another podcast years back. Someone had shared the idea of looking at a picture of yourself as a child and holding all of these insecurities and fears and feelings of less than about yourself, and then trying to impose that on that picture of that young person, that young version of myself. And of course, I would never say to a 6-year-old me, "Well, little girl, you're not entitled or worthy of all of those things."
Wow.
And now you're making me think of something that should have been incredibly obvious, Sharon. But um, with the birth of my son, when I was almost 30, 31, um, I recall taking a walk into a coffee shop, and he's in the infant carrier. So I've got him in that carrier in my arm. And as I'm walking into the coffee shop, a man is walking out, and he's kind of coming full steam ahead. And I kind of stepped aside with my baby Jack, and I said, "Oh, we're sorry." Like, we were in his way. And in that moment, I was so angry with myself, because I thought I was apologizing for me and this little innocent baby who had nothing to apologize for. And it was this light bulb moment that I was like, well, why am I apologizing for myself too? And so I think when you can start to see the things that you've experienced through your child at the various ages that you might have been, you just learn so much more about yourself.
Well, that's so powerful for me. You're basically confronting the reality of, I'm not going to do that to him.
That's right.
So, what you might not have been able to do for yourself, you are willing to change that language or change that mindset because he now matters.
That's right. And it just makes you so much more aware too of just what you've been holding
Man, yeah.
for yourself.
Shame is the nastiest, grossest, most horrible thing, and it thrives in the darkness and in the silence. And when we have those moments of being able to say like, "No, I reject it. I'm not doing this to him." It's like that radicalness of those choices have such long-term consequences for
You're
it.
not kidding. I love how you described that shame, and I think so many of us carry our own versions of that, and you're making me think of something that I experienced. I mentioned earlier, I had these thoughts about writing the book and everything
Mm,
was fine, but I've realized, my father had died pretty tragically. I was about 31 when he died, and he was at that point in life, he had become a vagabond, largely homeless, a nuisance drunk, like known to the local police in Worcester. And he was tragically shot while some guys were robbing a bar.
whoa.
Yeah. And so when he died, virtually had nothing to his name. I didn't write an obituary. I didn't put a post out on Facebook to say, "Oh, I've lost my father." It all just went by quietly.
Hmm.
And then my brother died by suicide now about 8 years ago. And he unfortunately lived very much the same life as in the same path that my parents did, unfortunately. And so when he passed, we did have an obituary. But did I make a post about it on Facebook to say, "Oh, I lost my poor brother"? He didn't even stand a chance.
Wow.
And then ultimately, my mother passed coming up on 3 years ago now. And it was in that aftermath, I
Mm.
recognized it was like, why am I not putting this out there? Not that you have to be public about your grief, but it wasn't lost on me that so many of us will make prideful posts about, "I lost this loved one that was so dear to me, and this person was amazing because of X, Y, and Z." And I think I felt that because I didn't have that proud story to tell about my family, that I had to keep it private. And I took this bold move at that time in my mother's death to, okay, it's been several years later. I
Yeah.
need to write an obituary for my father. And I put out a big post about the three of them passing because were these prideful moments to speak of and accolades? No, but they were my family and they were beautiful in their own right in
Hmm.
their lives. And that's a story worth sharing too.
Yeah.
There's no shame in that.
Right. There's such a moving thing. I think about writing an obituary. My father passed away and the grief of it, but it was so cathartic to process who he was and what he meant. Like the process of writing it allowed me to name a feeling and articulate and remember and do something. And it's extraordinary to hear you saying, it's like, I can tell this story now. I
That's
want to
right.
to tell this story now. And it brought you to the place where you wrote your biography, Raising Wrens. It's a memoir. It's your story. There must have been memories that were really hard to
Yes.
go back and visit.
Yes, for sure. And again, I thought I had a really good handle on things. And one of the things I did as part of this process was I had requested records from the Worcester Department of Youth and Family Services.
Wow.
Kind of, I wanted backup for the memories, right? And I was taken aback. Y- Um, one of the more difficult experiences that I share in the book is at the age of 12, I was experiencing an ongoing sexual abuse at the hands of a friend, somewhat a boyfriend of my mother. And I was 12 and 13 years old at that time. And that's an age where I have very vivid memories of that experience. And somehow to just see it in black and white as told from an independent third party
Hmm.
of what they saw happening, just it was very that was a very difficult thing for me to see, even though I was fully aware of what happened and had my own memories. And also, having said that, there were memories that I suppressed. And I had never thought of myself as a person with suppressed memories of trauma. That was a real eye opener for me.
When you're looking at the reference material, the documentation, was that like a police report? Was that a caseworker that was it describing it?
Yeah, it was a case report. And so I would say it was validating, right? It validated my memories, but it was also just jarring to just see somebody from outside, how they were viewing what they were seeing, how they described me as a child, how they described my brother as a child. It almost was a way of looking at that little, like a little girl in a photograph. I could see myself more independently as a
Mm,
child rather than just a smaller version of me and I got through it and I'm fine.
mm,
It really woke me up to what happened to me and of course how traumatic that would be for a child. And so just really an eye opener to what your brain will do to protect you. Yeah. So that came out of the process of writing this book. And I think, largely initially I put the book out there for myself, again, to claim that history for my own and to stand proud for what I've weathered. But something just really beautiful has come out in the wake of that. In putting my story out there, I've just been amazed by the people that have come forward and reached out and shared their own stories, and how many people, even people that I've known pretty well over the years, that could relate to aspects of my story. And they're now opening up about that and they finding connection and feeling less alone in those experiences. And that was such an unexpected and most beautiful outcome.
you mentioned the importance of your son. I know that you
Mm,
have a good, healthy marriage. Were there other people, or do you have a faith, or were there other tools that were at play as you've gone on this journey?
yeah, I think there there have been family members, extended family members that have played a role here and there, and some bigger than others. I have an aunt and uncle that were actually instrumental in me even considering applying to Dartmouth. And and there are much smaller ways that I think people have seen a light inside of me, and that being seen just gives you the power to maybe believe in your own self when you might
Mm,
not have had that. A simple, almost silly little story, but I'm so grateful for it. Today life looks very different than it did growing up in Worcester. Today I live in a seaside community, and the homes here, they look like they're right out of a postcard. And I've been here now over 10 years. And even after 10 years, I sometimes can struggle with that sense of belonging, like we talked about with Dartmouth. And there's this adorable little coffee shop in town where my husband and I had made this habit of going on Sunday mornings. And I mean, it's an adorable little place where the glass pastry case, the pastries look so beautiful. They're almost too pretty to touch,
yeah.
and you can smell the chocolate croissants, like,
Mm.
they make you forget you already had breakfast. And we'd gone there all these Sunday mornings, but on this one particular Sunday, the owner was there and ready to take my order. And she looked up at me and she greeted me by name. All she said was, "Hi, Mal." And it was enough to give me a lump in my throat, that frog you get in your throat, because in that super simple, small, ordinary thing, and acknowledging me by name for the first time, it was a message to me that, yeah, you're a member of this community. You belong here too. Sometimes we have to just keep rewriting that and reminding ourselves of that worthiness and that
It's
sense of belonging.
it's interesting because as I heard you describing it, it's like a Sunday morning doing something healthy and meditative and sacred. And I don't
Mm.
know, I feel there's a tremendous amount of power. That there's something holy about things like that, where it's like the veil gets a little bit opened.
I love that. I love the way you describe that. And I would love people to take away too, just the super simple, small ways that we can see others that you never know how that can change a life. I think you see a kid like me with all of these big, big challenges. And how can a regular person who's not a professional help somebody like that? You just have to sometimes say hello. And that reminds that person they matter. And it's huge. Say hello. And
Yeah,
that reminds that person they matter.
yeah.
And it's huge.
Yeah, that little girl inside of you felt seen, and that's so beautiful. So the final question I have for you, my friend, is finish this sentence about resilience. Resilience is
Resilience is not this one big event. I've conquered this. It's done. Resilience is all of these little tiny baby steps along the way that don't feel like anything really big or impressive. But boy, do those baby steps all add up to something great. Yeah. It's not pretty, but it's powerful.
it is a gift to share this time with you. I'm so grateful for your honesty and the healing and the good work that you've done, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for showing an interest in my story and for facilitating these conversations. They are so important because, again, just like in my sharing my own story in the book, the more people can hear from others and learn from their experiences, it's such a huge help for all of us. So thank you.
I hope you were as moved by that conversation as I was. Inspired, encouraged. Mal's story is one of resilience and hope and transformation. I invite you to read her memoir. You can learn more about that at malwrenncorbin.com. I'll add a link to the show notes. If this story inspired you or caused you to think of a friend or somebody you know going through a hard time, I invite you to share it with them. I invite you to leave a review or subscribe for future episodes. And if you have a story that you feel compelled to share, feel free to reach out. You can email me, sharon@sharonhugick.com, and I'd be glad to share an application with you. Thank you for spending your time with me today.